Hello, hello, hello. We are talking about one of my favorite battles of World War II. Um, well, next to the Battle of Stalingrad and all that, but we all know the U.S. was trying to involuntarily stay out of World War II because we got involved in World War One basically through the propaganda and stuff like that. Well, today we are going to be talking about Pearl Harbor, the battle that led us into to officially put us in because technically we were involved, but we weren't really involved at the same time. We were just lending our troops and stuff like that. If you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Please subscribe, help a girl out. This is down the rabbit hole, my ad, but here's the thing. In the words of FDR, December 7th, 1941 is a date that will forever be known, forever be infamy. I personally believe that this battle could have been a bit more prepared. Now, before I go into the history of that fateful day in Hawaii, I want to talk about three reasons that the U.S. could have been more prepared. Here are some of the three reasons right here. The Japanese launched two cruiser floats I can't talk for some reason, but anyway, the Japanese will launch two cruiser floats that will scout ahead the main strike to determine the readiness of the American defense. The second one is that the guarding of the entrance to Pearl Harbor was the destroyer USS Ward Double D-139. So, and third, this is the best and northernmost radar site Opana is Oahu. Two very junior enlisted men, Joseph L. Lockhart and George C. Elliott, were about to shut off their schedule at 7 a.m. when the attack at 7:02, and they saw by far the most sizable return echo ever of the American radio waves, etching a startling broad vertical spike on the Opana, and rebounding from some of 183 aircraft of the first wave of Japanese attacks. So, yeah, somebody's going to argue with me, but here's the thing. I love World War II. I love talking about like battles and stuff of U.S. history. I think it's important that we learn from our mistakes, and history teaches us that and everything. But here's the thing: what led to Japan declaring war on the U.S., right? Because you gotta think the U.S. was trying to avoid getting involved in the war to begin with, like holding out, like and everything, but there is a tangled relationship between the U.S. and Japan that began with the forces opening in Japan in the 19th century with courtesy of Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships of the squadron, where Japan's sudden exposure to the outside world after centuries of isolation would generate a helter-skelter period of transformation, a revolutionary era. In Japan, um, in which Japan threw overboard many of its oldest traditions to build it into a technologically advanced industrial state, with many systems of administration and government and powerful military. Now, Japan's rise to a great power status was rapid, with victorious wars over China and Russia as well as successful. Now, if the role on the side of the Allies in World War One again and again, Japan struck quickly to win wars over larger and theoretical more powerful opponents. The very success of Japan enjoyed, however, placed the island's empire squarely at the sides of the other great powers, and generated on increasingly tense strategic rivalries with the U.S. For domination in the Pacific. That was for the long fuse of the Great Pacific War. So, the long-term background to Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor was on December 7th, 1941. And here's the thing. Japan is an island. There's a lot of natural resources that Japan did have to outsource to have to get because they didn't have it. They don't have it. Like they had to resource, and there was one specific thing when they invaded China, like where it's like, okay, we're not gonna do it. Now, sitting in the Japanese crosshairs that fateful Sunday was not only the attack in the U.S. Pacific Fleet, but the Hawaiian Islands. An independent kingdom with a long, proud history of its own and then discovered by the West was dubbed in the Sandwich Islands. Hawaii had only become the U.S. possession in the 1890s when a rebellion by the Anglo population of the islands rose up to revolt against the Queen Lilo Yokalani. I apologize if I butchered that up. I am terrible with names. And this was declaring the Republic of Hawaii. And the rebels then requested annexation by the U.S., which took place in 1898. And since then, a new society has grown up by native islanders, Americans, and Japanese immigrants, and the economy was robust. Based on the island's numerous sugarcane plantations, Hawaii also saw an increasingly strong U.S. naval presence, a crucial moment that came in 1940. Now, as tensions would build between the U.S. and Japan, FDR ordered the U.S. Pacific Fleet to transfer from its home port in San Diego to Pearl Harbor. And it was that fateful decision for all parties concerned that the U.S. for concerned the U.S., Japan, and Hawaii itself. Now, here was the short fuse from mid 1940. When FDR would move the U.S. Pacific Fleet from San Diego to Pearl Harbor, there was a long simmering tension between the U.S. and Japan, reaching a new state of intensity. Japan had embroiled in the brutal war of conquest of China in 1937, and it was overrun by much of North China as well as the port cities along the coastlines. And the Japanese army was badly overstretched. However, it could neither protect its supply lines to the rear nor effectively control the territories it occupied. Its response of terror was against the Chinese civilians, hoping to cow them into submission. And the policy of these three owls, in order to that day, was to kill them, burn them, and loot them. Kill all, burn all, loot all. Now, cities who resisted, like Nanjing in 1937, suffered the consequences when the Japanese troops slaughtering hundreds and thousands of innocent civilians. Still, China fought under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, the National Army, along with the Allies, and the Communist forces of Mai Tse-tung, determined to help China and its halt Japan's aggressions on the Asian mainland. FDR waged economic warfare against China, and he hoped these embargoes on arms, scrap iron, and eventually oil would wound the Japanese economy sufficiently that it will halt Japan's war in China. His own advisors was unsure how to proceed should the U.S. follow a policy of strength, warning the Japanese against the consequences of continued aggression, or should they be aware of the conciliatory approach of negotiations leading to a long-term understanding? Now, Japan, for its part, um, was growing impatient and is stalemated by Chinese resistance with over 1 million Japanese soldiers trapped in quicksand of the war. Could not win. Japan needed to find a solution for a strategic crisis. As Hitler's armies rampaged across Europe, overrunning Germany's neighbors in 1939 to 40, then threatening to invade the British Isles, the European colonial empires in Asia lay nearly undefended. Ripe for the picking in the Malay Peninsula, the Dutch East Indies, Indochina, and rich sources of raw material lay in them rubber, tin, and especially oil. Now, the precious lifeblood of the modern economy. Now, perhaps the time had to come to reach out, pluck these balls of rice off the shelf, and to finally secure the resources that was necessary to end the war in China. Now, at the same time, Japan's leaders knew that such a policy would lead to a war with the U.S. As Japanese negotiators came to Washington for talks with the U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Holt in late 1941, military planners back in Tokyo were already deciding to roll the iron dice. They needed to launch a great strike, one that would seize the Western colonies and ensure the U.S. colonies that would not intervene. As they surveyed the map of the Pacific, their gaze came to a tiny spot in the Great Ocean. Can we guess what that tiny spot was? If you've guessed Pearl Harbor, you are correct. So, what about the Great Pacific War? Pearl Harbor was a great gamble for Japan, especially with the Imperial Japanese Navy. It was also a piece of skilled military planning, the work of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Japan dispatched all six of its precious fleet carriers across 3,000 miles of open oceans in total secrecy. With the fleet arriving a few hundred miles north of the Hawaiian Islands, the carriers launched their aircraft on Sunday morning. Now, U.S. forces were completely unprepared. In less than 90 minutes, Japanese planes destroyed or damaged 19 U.S. warships, 300 aircraft, killed over 2,400 U.S. servicemen. Almost half of the dead were crewmen on the battleship the USS Arizona, which would sink within minutes after a bomb struck its forward magazine, igniting more than millions of ammunition, and the ships remain still in the water of Pearl Harbor today. In a constant memorial to that terrible morning. Now, with the U.S. Navy temporarily out of the way, a massive Japanese offensive overran European and colonial empires in Asia, Hong Kong, Malaya, and Dutch East New Guinea, and U.S. possessions too. Came under attack. The Philippines was a major U.S. base in Asia, Guam, and the Wake Island. And the Japanese assault seemed irresistible, and the two places there were surrenders at Singapore and on the tip of the Malaya. 80,000 British, Indian, and Australian troops were in captivity on February 1942. On the Philippines attacking the Japanese forces, outmaneuvered a combined U.S. Filipino under General Douglas MacArthur. And the defenders retreated to the Bataan Peninsula to finally onto the Corridor Island, and MacArthur evacuated the islands. But his entire force of 75,000 men on April 1942, the worst military defeat in the U.S. history. Now, the Japanese captors, now subjected to the brutal 65 march to a POW camp in the Philippines, hence the infamous Bataan Death March, and of course, of just 5 days. At least 5,000 died, and perhaps many more grisly signs was what to come with the Japanese called the Great Pacific War. Now, Pearl Harbor was a battle that, if anything, it taught us that we need to learn, that we need to be more prepared, anything. And the battle was very, what's the word I'm looking for? Disastrous. We lost a lot of lives there was a lot of lives lost that day and everything else. But y'all have a great day, and I will see y'all next time.